Welcome, and thank you for being here. Tonight, we're about to wander softly into one of the most magical fairy tales ever shared. There's nothing expected of you. Simply get comfortable, slow your breathing, and let the weight of the day quietly fade. If this place feels warm or soothing to you, you're always invited to stay a little longer by liking the video or subscribing, but only if it feels natural. I cherish knowing where these stories are heard. So if you'd like, leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what hour the night has arrived for you. Now, dim the lights, let a gentle sound settle around you, and allow yourself to drift peacefully, unhurried, into tonight's story. She was good for nothing. The mayor was standing at his open window. He was wearing a dress shirt with a dainty breast pin in its frill. He was very well shaven, self-done, though he had cut himself slightly and had stuck a small bit of newspaper over the cut. "Listen, youngster," he boomed. The youngster was none other than the washerwoman's son, who respectfully took off his cap as he passed. This cap was broken at the rim so that he could put it into his pocket. In his poor but clean and very neatly mended clothes and his heavy wooden shoes, the boy stood as respectfully as if he were before the king. "You're a good boy, a well-behaved lad," said the mayor. "I suppose your mother is washing down at the river, and no doubt you are going to bring her what you have in your pocket. That's an awful thing with your mother. How much have you there?" "A half-pint," said the boy in a low, trembling voice. "And this morning she had the same," continued the mayor. "No, it was yesterday," answered the boy. "Two halves make a whole. She is no good. It is sad there are such people. Tell your mother she ought to be ashamed of herself. Don't you become a drunkard. But I suppose you will. Poor child, run along now." And the boy went still, holding his cap in his hand, while the wind rippled the waves of his yellow hair. He went down the street and through an alley to the river, where his mother stood at her washing stool in the water, beating the heavy linen with a wooden beater. The current was strong for the mills. Sluices were open. The bedsheet was dragged along by the stream and nearly swept away her washing stool, and the woman had all she could do to stand up against it. "I was almost carried away," she said. "It's a good thing you've come, for I need something to strengthen me. It's so cold in the water. I've been standing here for 6 hours. Have you brought me anything?" The boy drew forth a flask, and his mother put it to her lips and drank a little. "Oh, that does me good. How it warms me. It's just as good as hot food, and it isn't as expensive. Drink, my boy. You look so pale and you're freezing in your thin clothes. Remember, it is autumn. Ooh, the water is cold. If only I don't get ill. But I won't. Give me a little more and drink some. Yourself, but only a little drop, for you mustn't get used to it, my poor dear child. And she walked out of the water and up onto the bridge where the boy stood. The water dripped from the straw mat that she had tied around her waist and from her petticoat. I work and slave till the blood runs out at my fingernails, but I do it gladly if I can bring you up, honestly, my sweet child. Just then came an elderly woman, poorly clad, lame in one leg, and with an enormously large false curl hanging down over one of her eyes, which was blind. This curl was supposed to hide the eye, but it only made the defect the more conspicuous. The neighbors called her Limping Maren with the curl, and she was an old friend of the washerwoman's. "You poor thing," she cried, slaving and toiling in the cold water. "You certainly need something to warm you a little, and yet the gossips cry about the few drops you take." And soon all that the mayor had said to the boy was repeated to his mother, for Maren had overheard it. And it had angered her to hear him talk so to the child about his own mother and the few drops she took, because on that same day the mayor was having a big dinner party with many bottles of wine. Good wine, strong wine. Many will drink more than they should, but they don't call that drinking. They are all right, but you are good for nothing. What did the mayor really say? That child asked the laundress, her lips quivering. So you have a mother who is good for nothing. Perhaps he's right, though he shouldn't say so to a child. But I mustn't complain. Good things have come to me from that house. Why, yes, you were in service there when the mayor's parents were alive. That was many years ago. Many bushels of salt have been eaten since then, so people may well be thirsty, laughed Maren. The big dinner today at the mayor's would have been postponed if everything hadn't been prepared. I heard the news from the porter. A letter came an hour ago telling them that the mayor's younger brother in Copenhagen is dead. Dead, cried the laundress, turning as white as a ghost. What does it matter to you? Said Maren. Of course you must have known him since you worked in the house. Is he really dead? He was the best and kindest of men. Indeed, there aren't many like him. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Oh my God. Everything is going around. That's because I emptied the bottle. I couldn't stand so much. I feel so ill. And she leaned against the fence for support. Good heavens, you are ill indeed, said Maren. Try to get over it. No, you really are sick. I'd better get you home. But the washing there, I'll take care of that. Here, give me your arm. The boy can stay here and watch it till I come back and wash what's left. It's only a few pieces. The poor laundress's legs were trembling under her. I've stood too long in the cold water with no food since yesterday. I have a burning fever. Oh, dear Lord Jesus, help me to get home. Oh, my poor child. And she wept. The boy cried too, as he sat alone beside the river, guarding the wet linen. The two women made their way slowly, the washerwoman dragging her shaky limbs up the little alley and through the street where the mayor lived. Just as she reached the front of his house, she sank down on the cobblestones. A crowd gathered around her, limping. Marin ran into his yard for help. The mayor and his guests came to the windows. "It's the washerwoman," he said. "She's had a bit too much to drink. She's no good. It's a pity for that handsome boy of hers. I really like that child, but his mother is good for nothing." And the washerwoman was brought to her own humble room, where she was put to bed. Kindly, Marin hastened to prepare a cup of warm ale with butter and sugar. She could think of no better medicine in such a case, and then returned to the river, where, although she meant well, she did a very poor job with the washing. She only pulled the wet clothes out of the water and put them into a basket. That evening, she appeared again in the washerwoman's miserable room. She had begged from the mayor's cook a couple of roasted potatoes and a fine, fat piece of ham for the sick woman. Marin and the boy feasted on these, but the patient was satisfied with the smell, for that was very nourishing, she said. The boy was put to bed in the same one in which his mother slept, lying crosswise at his mother's feet, with a blanket of old blue and red carpet ends sewed together. The laundress felt a little better now. The warm ale had given her strength, and the smell of the good food had been nourishing. "Thank you, my kind friend," she said to Marin. "I'll tell you all about it while the boy is asleep. He's sleeping already. See how sweet he looks with his eyes closed. He doesn't think of his mother's sufferings. May our Lord never let him feel their equal. Well, I was in service at the counselors, the mayor parents, when their youngest son came home from his studies. I was a carefree young girl then, but honest. I must say that before heaven. And the student was so pleasant and jolly. Every drop of blood in his veins was honest and true. A better young man never lived. He was a son of the house, and I was only a servant, but we became sweethearts, all honorably. A kiss is no sin, after all, if people really love each other. And he told his mother that he loved me. She was an angel in his eyes, wise and kind and loving. And when he went away again, he put his old ring on my finger. After he had gone, my mistress called me in to speak to me. She looked so grave and yet so kind, and spoke as wisely as an angel indeed. She pointed out to me the gulf of difference, both mentally and materially, that lay between her son and me. Now he is attracted by your good looks, but that will fade in time. You haven't received his education. Intellectually, you can never rise to his level. I honor the poor, she continued, and I know that there is many a poor man who will sit in a higher seat in the kingdom of heaven than many a rich man. But that is no reason for crossing the barrier in this world. Left to yourselves, you two would drive your carriage full tilt against obstacles until it toppled over with you both. Now I know that Eric, the glove maker, a good, honest craftsman, wants to marry you. He is a well-to-do widower with no children. Think it over. Every word my mistress spoke went through my heart like a knife. But I knew she was right, and that weighed heavily upon me. I kissed her hand, and my bitter tears fell upon it. But still bitterer tears fell when I lay upon my bed in my own room. Oh, the long, dreary night that followed. Our Lord alone knows how I suffered. Not until I went to church on Sunday did peace of mind come after my pain. It seemed the working of Providence that as I left the church, I met Eric himself. There were no doubts in my mind now. We were suited to each other, both in rank and in means. He was even a well-to-do man. So I went straight up to him, took his hand, and asked, "Do you still think of me?" "Yes, always and forever," he said. "Do you want to marry a girl who likes and respects you, but does not love you? I believe love will come," he said. And then we joined hands. I went home to my mistress. The gold ring that her son had given me, I had been wearing every day next to my heart, and every night on my finger in bed. But now I drew it out. I kissed it until my lips bled, then gave it to my mistress, and told her that next week the banns would be read for me and the glove maker. My mistress took me in her arms and kissed me. She didn't say I was good for nothing, but at that time I was perhaps better than I am now, for I had not yet known the misfortunes of the world. The wedding was at Candlemas, and for our first year we were quite happy. My husband had a workman and an apprentice with him, and you, Marin, were our servant. Oh, and such a good mistress you were, said Marin. I shall never forget how kind you and your husband were to me. But you were with us during our good times, We had no children then. I never saw the student again. Oh, yes, I saw him once, but he didn't see me. He came to his mother's funeral, and I saw him standing by her grave, looking so sad and pale. But that was all for his mother's sake. When his father died later, he was abroad and didn't come to that funeral. He didn't come here again. He became a lawyer, and he never married, I know. But he thought no more of me, and if he had seen me, he would certainly have never recognized me, ugly as I am now. And it is all for the best. Then she went on to tell of the bitter days of hardship when misfortune had fallen upon them. They had saved $500, and since in their neighborhood a house could be bought for $200, they considered it a good investment to buy one, tear it down, and build again. So the house was bought, and the bricklayers and carpenters estimated that the new house would cost $1,020. Eric had credit and borrowed that sum in Copenhagen, but the captain who was to have brought the money was shipwrecked, and the money lost. It was just then that my darling boy, who lies sleeping there, was born. Then his father had a long and severe illness, and for 9 months I even had to dress and undress him every day. We kept on going backward. We had to borrow more and more. One by one, all our possessions were sold. And at last, Eric died. Since then, I have worked and slaved for the boy's sake, have gone out scrubbing floors and washing linen, done coarse work, or find whatever I could get. But I was not to be better off. It is the Lord's will. He will take me away and find better provisions for my child. Then she fell asleep. In the morning, she seemed better and decided she was strong enough to return to her work. But the moment she felt the cold water, a shivering seized her. She grasped about convulsively. With her hands, took one step forward and fell. Her head lay on the dry bank, but her feet were in the water of the river. Her wooden shoes, in each of which there was a handful of straw, were carried away by the current. And here she was, found by Maren, when she came to bring her some coffee. A message had come to her lodging that the mayor wanted to see her, for he had something to say to her. It was too late. A doctor was summoned. The poor washerwoman was dead. She has drunk herself to death, said the mayor. The letter that had brought the mayor the news of his brother's death also gave a summary of his will, and among other bequests, he had left $600 to the glovemaker's widow, who had formerly served his parents. The money was to be paid at discretion in large or small sums to her and her child. There was some nonsense about love between my brother and her, said the mayor. It's just as well she's out of the way. Now it will all come to the boy, and I'll place him with some honest people who will make him a good workman." And on these words, our Lord laid his blessings. And the mayor sent for the boy, promised to take care of him, and told him it was a lucky thing his mother was dead. She was good for nothing. They carried her to the churchyard to a pauper's grave. Marin planted a little rose tree on her grave, while the boy stood beside her. "My darling mother," he said, as the tears started from his eyes. "Is it true that she was good for nothing?" "No, it is not true," said the old woman, looking up to heaven. "I have known it for many years, and especially since the night before she died. I tell you, she was a good and fine woman, and our Lord in heaven will say so too. So let the world say she was good for nothing." The New Century's Goddess. The new century's goddess, whom our great-grandchildren, or perhaps a still later generation, will know. But we shall not. When and how does she reveal herself? What does she look like? What is the theme of her song? Whose heartstrings will she touch? To what heights will she lift her century? Why so many questions in a busy day like ours, when poetry is very nearly superfluous, when it is agreed that the many immortal productions of today's poets will in the future perhaps exist only in the form of charcoal tracings on a prison wall, seen and read only by a few curiosity seekers. Poesy is required to serve in the ranks, at least to accept the challenge in party wars, whether it be blood or ink that flows. But this is only one-sided talk, many will say. Poesy has not been entirely forgotten in our time. No, there are still people who, when they are not busy, are conscious of a desire for poetry, and no sooner do they feel that spiritual rumbling in their respective nobler parts than they promptly go to a bookstore and buy 4 shillings worth of poetry of the most approved styles. Others take much pleasure from whatever they can get at a bargain. They are contented with reading the scrap that is on the grocer's wrapping paper. It is much cheaper, and in our busy time, we must take notice of that. There is demand for whatever is supplied, and that is enough. The poetry of the future, as well as the poetry of music, is reckoned with the Don Quixotiana. To speak of it is much like speaking of a voyage of discovery to Uranus. Time is too short and precious for the mere plays of fantasy, and to speak seriously for once what is poetry. These resonant outpourings of feeling and thought, they are only the offspring of nervous vibrations. Enthusiasm, joy, pain, all the movements of the organism, the wise men tell us, are but nerve vibrations. Each of us is but a string instrument. but who touches the strings, who causes them to vibrate into sound. The Spirit, the unseen heavenly Spirit, who echoes in them his emotion, his feelings, and these are understood by other string instruments which respond in melting harmonies or clashing dissonances. So it was, and so it will be in mankind's mighty onward march in the consciousness of freedom. Each century, each 1,000 years, one might even say, has its chief expression in its poetry. Born in the passing era, it comes forth and reigns in the new succeeding era. Thus, she is already born, this goddess of the new century, amid the roar of today as machinery. We send her our greetings. May she hear this, or sometime read it, perhaps among the charcoal tracings we just mentioned. The rocker of her cradle extended from the farthest point reached by the foot of man on polar voyages as far as the living eye can gaze into the jet depth of the polar sky. We would never hear the rocking, for the clatter of engines, the screams of locomotives, the thunder of quarry blasts, and the bursting of the spirit-souled bonds. She is born in the vast factory of the present, where steam sets in action its power, and where Master Bloodless and his crew toil night and day. She bears the womanly heart of love, the vestal flame, and the furnace of passion. Hers is the lightning ray of intellect in all its endless, shifting, prismatic hues of the ages. Fantasy, its vast swan-feathered tunic, is her strength and pride. Science wove it. The elemental forces gave it power of wing. On her father's side, she is a child of the people's sound in sense and heart, with an earnest eye and with humor on her lips. Her mother is the high-born, academy-trained emigrant-s daughter, with gilded Rococo reminiscences. The goddess of the new century has in her the blood and soul of both. Upon her cradle were laid splendid birthday gifts. Plentiful as bonbons, the occult riddles of nature with their solutions are strewn there. The diver's bell gives mystic souvenirs from the deep. The map of the heavens, that high-hung Pacific Ocean with its countless isles, each a world in itself, is embroidered on the cradle cloth. The sun paints her pictures. Photography has given her toys to play with. The nurse has sung to her of Eyvind Skaldespiller and Ferdowsi of the Minnesingers, and what Heine Bold as a boy sang from his poetic soul. Much, far too much, has the nurse told her. She knows the Edda, the old great-grandmother, as frightful tales, where horrors sweep the air with bloody wings. The whole of the Oriental 1001 nights she heard in the quarter part of an hour. The goddess of the new century is still a child, but she has sprung forth from her cradle, and is governed by will, though she still doesn't know what she wants. She is still at play in her vast nursery, packed with treasures of art and the Rococo. Greek tragedy and Roman comedy are carved there in marble. The folk songs of the nations cover the walls like withered vines, a kiss from her, and they blossom forth with freshness and sweet vapor. The mighty tones and thoughts of Beethoven, Mozart, Gluck, and the other great masters surround her with eternal chords. On her bookshelves are many laid to rest, who in their day were immortal. And there is yet room for many another, whose name we hear clicking from the telegraph of immortality, but who dies with the telegram. She has read an awful lot, far too much, for is she not born in our time? And all too much must again be forgotten. But the goddess will know how to forget. She doesn't think of her song, which will flourish in thousands of years to come, beside the legends of Moses and Bidpai's golden fable about the craft and luck of the fox. She doesn't think of her mission or of her melodious future. She is still playing while the struggles of nations shake the air and sound figures of pen and cannon rush to and fro, runes of mystic reading. She wears a Garibaldi hat, and when she reads her Shakespeare, she stops for a moment to think. He can still be played when I am grown. Calderon rests in the tomb of his works, beneath the tablet of his glory. The goddess is cosmopolitan, for she has bound together Holberg with Molière, Plautus, and Aristophanes. But most she reads her Molière. She is free from the turbulence that drives the goats of the Alps, but still her soul yearns for the salt of life, as the goats pant for the mountain salt. There is calm in her heart, as in the ancient Hebrew songs, the voice of the nomad drifts over green pastures beneath starry skies. And yet in song, her heart swells mightier than the heart of the inspired warrior from the Thessalonian mountains in the old days of Greece. How goes it with her Christendom? She has learned the ins and outs of philosophy. The elements broke one of her milk teeth, but a new one grew. While yet in the cradle, she ate of the fruit of knowledge and grew wise, so that immortality flashed forth before her as mankind, as happiest thought. When begins the new age of poesy? When will the goddess be known? When will she be heard? On a wonderful spring morning, she will come on the locomotive dragon, thundering over bridges and through dark tunnels, or on the back of the puffing dolphin across the calm but surging sea, or high in the air, carried by Montgolfier's bird, rock, descending in the land, where first her God-given voice shall greet the race of man. When will she come from the newfound land of Columbus, the land of freedom, where the native is hunted and the African is a beast of burden. The land from where we heard the song of Hiawatha, or from the Antipodes, that golden nugget in the southern sea, the land of opposites, where our nighttime is their daytime, and where the black swans sing in mossy forests. Or maybe from the land where Memnon's pillar rings, but we never understood the song of the Sphinx in the desert, from the Isle of the Coal Pit, where since the age of the great Elizabeth Shakespeare has reigned, or from Tycho, Brahe's home where he wasn't wanted, or from California's fairyland, where the redwood holds high its crown as king of the earth's forests. When shall the star be lit? The star on the brow of the goddess, the flower on whose petals is inscribed the century's ideal of beauty in form, color, and fragrance. What is the goddess's new platform? Inquires the skillful politician of the day. What does she stand for? Better ask what she does not stand for. She will not appear as a ghost of bygone times. She will not fashion her dramas from the discarded splendor of the stage, nor cover the lack of dramatic architecture with the dazzling colors of lyric drapery. Her flight forth among us will be as from the car of Thespis to the marble arena. She will not shatter normal human speech to fragments to be clinked together for an artificial music box with tones from troubadour tournaments. Nor will she separate patrician verse and plain plebeian prose. Twins are they in voice quality and power, nor will she carve from the saga blocks of Iceland and ancient gods, for they are dead. No sympathy or fellowship awaits them in our day. Nor will she command her generation to occupy their thoughts with the fabric of a French novel. Nor will she dull them with the chloroform of everyday history. She will bring the elixir of life. Her song, whether in verse or prose, will be brief, clear, and rich. The nation's heartbeats are but letters in the endless alphabet of mankind's growth. She grasps each letter with equal lovingness, and ranges all in words, and weaves her words into rhythms for her age's hymn. And when shall the hour come? It will be long to us who are still here, brief to those who have flown ahead. The Chinese wall will soon fall. The railways of Europe open old Asia, tightly sealed culture archives, and the opposing streams of human culture meet, mayhap, with a thunderous crash. The oldsters of our days will tremble at that sound, and hear in it a judgment, the fall of ancient gods, forgetting that times and peoples must pass from the earth, and only a tiny image sealed in a word. Casket remain of each floating like a lotus flower on the stream of eternity, and telling us that all were flesh of our flesh, dressed in different attire. The Jewish image shines radiant from the Bible, the Greek from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and ours. Ask it of the coming goddess at judgment time, when the new heaven is lifted to light and sight at the judgment day. All the power of steam and all the pressure of modern times were levers. Master Bloodless and his busy crew, who seem the all-powerful rulers of our day, are but its servants, black slaves to adorn the festive hall, open its treasures, set its tables for the great feast day, when the goddess, a child of innocence, a maid of inspiration, a matron of calm wisdom, shall lift on high the wonderful lamp of poetry. That rich, full human heart, flaming with the fire of God. Greetings, you, goddess of poetry. Coming age. May our salutation be heard, as is heard the worm's hymn of thanksgiving, the worm that is cut to pieces beneath the plow, while a new springtime is dawning, and the plowman draws his furrow among us, worms crushing us, that your blessings may be bestowed upon the coming generation. Greetings, you, goddess of the new century. Ole-Luk-Oie, the dream god. There is nobody in the world who knows so many stories as Ole-Luk-Oie, or who can relate them so nicely. In the evening, while the children are seated at the table or in their little chairs, he comes up the stairs very softly, for he walks in his socks. Then he opens the doors without the slightest noise and throws a small quantity of very fine dust in their eyes, just enough to prevent them from keeping them open, and so they do not see him. Then he creeps behind them and blows softly upon their necks till their heads begin to droop. But Ole-Luk-Oie does not wish to hurt them, for he is very fond of children and only wants them to be quiet, that he may relate to them pretty stories. And they never are quiet until they are in bed and asleep. As soon as they are asleep, Ole-Luk-Oie seats himself upon the bed. He is nicely dressed. His coat is made of silken stuff. It is impossible to say of what color, for it changes from green to red, and from red to blue, as he turns from side to side. Under each arm he carries an umbrella, one of them with pictures on the inside he spreads over the good children, and then they dream the most beautiful stories the whole night. But the other umbrella has no pictures, and this he holds over the naughty children, so that they sleep heavily and wake in the morning without having dreamed at all. Now we shall hear how Ole-Luk-Oie came every night during a whole week to the little boy named Hjalmar, and what he told him. There were 7 stories, as there are 7 days in the week. Monday, "Now pay attention," said Ole-Luk-Oie in the evening when Hjalmar was in bed, "and I will decorate the room." Immediately, all the flowers in the flower pots became large trees with long branches reaching to the ceiling and stretching along the walls, so that the whole room was like a greenhouse. All the branches were loaded with flowers, each flower as beautiful and as fragrant as a rose. And had anyone tasted them, he would have found them sweeter even than jam. The fruit glittered like gold, and there were cakes so full of plums that they were nearly bursting. It was incomparably beautiful. At the same time sounded dismal moans from the table drawer in which lay Hjalmar's school books. "What can that be?" now said Ole-Luk-Oie, going to the table and pulling out the drawer. It was a slate in such distress because of a false number in the sum that it had almost broken itself to pieces. The pencil pulled and tugged at its string as if it were a little dog that wanted to help but could not. And then came a moan from Hjalmar's copybook. Oh, it was quite terrible to hear. On each leaf stood a row of capital letters, every one having a small letter by its side. This formed a copy. Under these were other letters which Hjalmar had written. They fancied they looked like the copy, but they were mistaken, for they were leaning on one side as if they intended to fall over the pencil lines. "See, this is the way you should hold yourselves," said the copy. "Look here, you should slope thus with a graceful curve. Oh, we are very willing to do so, but we cannot said Hjalmar's letters. We are so wretchedly made." "You must be scratched out, then," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "Oh, no," they cried, and then they stood up so gracefully it was quite a pleasure to look at them. "Now we must give up our stories and exercise these letters," said Ole-Luk-Oie 1212. So he drilled them till they stood up gracefully and looked as beautiful as a copy could look. But after Ole-Luk-Oie was gone and Hjalmar looked at them, in the morning they were as wretched and as awkward as ever. Tuesday. As soon as Hjalmar was in bed, Ole-Luk-Oie touched with his little magic wand all the furniture in the room, which immediately began to chatter, and each article only talked of itself. Over the chest of drawers hung a large picture in a gilt frame, representing a landscape with fine old trees, flowers in the grass, and a broad stream which flowed through the wood past several castles far out into the wild ocean. Ole-Luk-Oie touched the picture with his magic wand, and immediately the birds commenced singing. The branches of the trees rustled, and the clouds moved across the sky, casting their shadows on the landscape beneath them. Then Ole-Luk-Oie lifted little Hjalmar up to the frame and placed his feet in the picture, just on the high grass. And there he stood, with the sun shining down upon him through the branches of the trees. He ran to the water and seated himself in a little boat which lay there, and which was painted red and white. The sails glittered like silver, and 6 swans each, with a golden circlet round its neck and a bright blue star on its forehead, drew the boat past the green wood, where the trees talked of robbers and witches, and the flowers of beautiful little elves and fairies, whose histories the butterflies had related to them. Brilliant fish with scales like silver and gold swam after the boat, sometimes making a spring and splashing the water round them, while birds, red and blue, small and great, flew after him in 2 long lines. The gnats danced round them, and the cockchafers cried, "Buzz, buzz." They all wanted to follow Hjalmar, and all had some story to tell him. It was a most pleasant sail. Sometimes the forests were thick and dark, sometimes like a beautiful garden, gay with sunshine and flowers. Then he passed great palaces of glass and of marble, and on the balconies stood princesses whose faces were those of little girls whom Hjalmar knew well and had often played with. One of them held out her hand, in which was a heart made of sugar, more beautiful than any confectioner ever sold. As Hjalmar sailed by, he caught hold of one side of the sugar heart and held it fast, and the princess held fast also, so that it broke in 2 pieces. Hjalmar had 1 piece, and the princess the other, but Hjalmar's was the largest. At each castle stood little princes acting as sentinels. They presented arms and had golden swords and made it rain plums and tin soldiers, so that they must have been real princes. Hjalmar continued to sail, sometimes through woods, sometimes, as it were, through large halls, and then by large cities. At last, he came to the town where his nurse lived, who had carried him in her arms when he was a very little boy, and had always been kind to him. She nodded and beckoned to him, and then sang the little verses she had herself composed, and said to him, "How oft my memory turns to thee, my own Hjalmar ever dear, when I could watch thy infant glee, or kiss away a pearly tear. 'Twas in my arms thy lisping tongue first spoke the half-remembered word, while o'er thy tottering steps I hung my fond protection to afford. Farewell, I pray the heavenly power to keep thee till thy dying hour." And all the birds sang the same tune, the flowers danced on their stems, and the old trees nodded, as if Ole-Luk-Oie had been telling them stories as well. Wednesday. How the rain did pour down, Hjalmar could hear it in his sleep. And when Ole-Luk-Oie opened the window, the water flowed quite up to the windowsill. It had the appearance of a large lake outside, and a beautiful ship lay close to the house. "Wilt thou sail with me tonight?" Little Hjalmar said, "Ole-Luk-Oie, then we shall see foreign countries, and thou shalt return here in the morning." All in a moment there stood Hjalmar in his best clothes on the deck of the noble ship. And immediately the weather became fine. They sailed through the streets round by the church, and on every side rolled the wide, great sea. They sailed till the land disappeared, and then they saw a flock of storks who had left their own country and were traveling to warmer climates. The storks flew one behind the other, and had already been a long, long time on the wing. One of them seemed so tired that his wings could scarcely carry him. He was the last of the row, and was soon left very far behind. At length, he sunk lower and lower, with outstretched wings, flapping them in vain, till his feet touched the rigging of the ship, and he slided from the sails to the deck and stood before them. Then a sailor boy caught him and put him in the hen house with the fowls, the ducks, and the turkeys, while the poor stork stood quite bewildered amongst them. "Just look at that fellow," said the chickens. Then the turkey cock puffed himself out as large as he could and inquired who he was. And the ducks waddled backwards, crying, "Quack, quack." Then the stork told them all about warm Africa of the pyramids, and of the ostrich, which like a wild horse runs across the desert. But the ducks did not understand what he said, and quacked amongst themselves, "We are all of the same opinion, namely, that he is stupid." "Yes, so to be sure he is stupid," said the turkey cock, and gobbled. Then the stork remained quite silent, and thought of his home in Africa. "Those are handsome, thin legs of yours," said the turkey cock. "What do they cost a yard?" "Quack, quack, quack," grinned the ducks, but the stork pretended not to hear. "You may as well laugh," said the turkey, "for that remark was rather witty, or perhaps it was above you. Ah, is he not clever? He will be a great amusement to us while he remains here." And then he gobbled, and the ducks quacked, "Gobble, gobble, quack, quack." What a terrible uproar they made while they were having such fun among themselves. Then Hjalmar went to the hen house, and opening the door, called to the stork. Then he hopped out on the deck. He had rested himself now, and he looked happy, and seemed as if he nodded to Hjalmar, as if to thank him. Then he spread his wings and flew away to warmer countries, while the hens clucked, the ducks quacked, and the turkey cock turned quite scarlet in the head. tomorrow you shall be made into soup," said Hjalmar to the fowls. And then he awoke and found himself lying in his little bed. It was a wonderful journey which Ole-Luk-Oie had made him take this night. Thursday. "What do you think I have got here?" said Ole-Luk-Oie. "Do not be frightened, and you shall see a little mouse." And then he held out his hand to him, in which lay a lovely little creature. "It has come to invite you to a wedding. 2 little mice are going to enter into the marriage state tonight. They reside under the floor of your mother's storeroom, and that must be a fine dwelling place." "But how can I get through the little mouse hole in the floor?" asked Hjalmar. "Leave me to manage that," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "I will soon make you small enough." And then he touched Hjalmar with his magic wand, whereupon he became less and less, until at last he was not longer than a little finger. "Now you can borrow the dress of the tin soldier. I think it will just fit you. It looks well to wear a uniform when you go into company." "Yes, certainly," said Hjalmar. And in a moment he was dressed as neatly as the neatest of all tin soldiers. "Will you be so good as to seat yourself in your mamma's thimble?" said the little mouse, "that I may have the pleasure of drawing you to the wedding." "Will you really take so much trouble, young lady?" said Hjalmar. And so, in this way, he rode to the mouse's wedding. First, they went under the floor, and then passed through a long passage, which was scarcely high enough to allow the thimble to drive under. And the whole passage was lit up with the phosphorescent light of rotten wood. "Does it not smell delicious?" asked the mouse as she drew him along. "The wall and the floor have been smeared with bacon rind. Nothing can be nicer." Very soon they arrived at the bridal hall. On the right stood all the little lady mice, whispering and giggling as if they were making game of each other. To the left were the gentleman mice stroking their whiskers with their forepaws. And in the center of the hall could be seen the bridal pair standing side by side in a hollow cheese rind and kissing each other while all eyes were upon them. For they had already been betrothed and were soon to be married. More and more friends kept arriving till the mice were nearly treading each other to death. For the bridal pair now stood in the doorway, and none could pass in or out. The room had been rubbed over with bacon rind, like the passage which was all the refreshment offered to the guests. But for dessert, they produced a pea on which a mouse belonging to the bridal pair had bitten the first letters of their names. This was something quite uncommon. All the mice said it was a very beautiful wedding, and that they had been very agreeably entertained. After this, Hjalmar returned home. He had certainly been in grand society, but he had been obliged to creep under a room and to make himself small enough to wear the uniform of a tin soldier. Friday. It is incredible how many old people there are who would be glad to have me at night, said Ole-Luk-Oie, especially those who have done something wrong. Good little Ola, say they to me, we cannot close our eyes, and we lie awake the whole night and see all our evil deeds sitting on our beds like little imps and sprinkling us with hot water. Will you come and drive them away, that we may have a good night's rest? And then they sigh so deeply and say, we would gladly pay you for it. Good night, Ole-Luk. The money lies on the window. But I never do anything for gold. What shall we do tonight? Asked Hjalmar. I do not know whether you would care to go to another wedding, he replied, although it is quite a different affair to the one we saw last night. Your sister's large doll, that is dressed like a man and is called Herman, intends to marry the doll Bertha. It is also the doll's birthday, and they will receive many presents. Yes, I know that already, said Hjalmar. My sister always allows her dolls to keep their birthdays or to have a wedding when they require new clothes. That has happened already 100 times, I am quite sure. Yes, so it may. But tonight is the 101st wedding, and when that has taken place, it must be the last. Therefore, this is to be extremely beautiful. Only look. Hjalmar looked at the table, and there stood the little cardboard doll's house, with lights in all the windows, and drawn up before it were the tin soldiers presenting arms. The bridal pair were seated on the floor, leaning against the leg of the table, looking very thoughtful, and with good reason. Then Ole-Luk-Oie, dressed up in grandmother's black gown, married them. As soon as the ceremony was concluded, all the furniture in the room joined in singing a beautiful song which had been composed by the lead pencil and which went to the melody of a military tattoo. What merry sounds are on the wind as marriage writes together. Bind a quiet and a loving pair, though formed of kid yet smooth and fair. Hurrah, if they are deaf and blind, we'll sing though weather prove unkind. And now came the present, but the bridal pair had nothing to eat, for love was to be their food. Shall we go to a country house or travel? Asked the bridegroom. Then they consulted the swallow who had traveled so far, and the old hen in the yard who had brought up 5 broods of chickens. And the swallow talked to them of warm countries where the grapes hang in large clusters on the vines, and the air is soft and mild, and about the mountains glowing with colors more beautiful than we can think of. But they have no red cabbage, like we have, said the hen. I was once in the country with my chickens for a whole summer. There was a large sand pit in which we could walk about and scratch as we liked. Then we got into a garden in which grew red cabbage. Oh, how nice it was! I cannot think of anything more delicious. But one cabbage stalk is exactly like another, said the swallow. And here we have often bad weather. Yes, but we are accustomed to it, said the hen. But it is so cold here and freezes sometimes. Cold weather is good for cabbages, said the hen. Besides, we do have it warm here sometimes. 4 years ago, we had a summer that lasted more than 5 weeks, and it was so hot one could scarcely breathe. And then in this country, we have no poisonous animals, and we are free from robbers. He must be wicked who does not consider our country the finest of all lands. He ought not to be allowed to live here. And then the hen wept very much and said, I have also traveled. I once went 12 miles in a coop, and it was not pleasant traveling at all. The hen is a sensible woman, said the doll, Bertha. I don't care for traveling over mountains just to go up and come down again. No, let us go to the sand pit in front of the gate, and then take a walk in the cabbage garden. And so they settled it. Saturday. Am I to hear any more stories? Asked little Hjalmar, as soon as Ole-Luk-Oie had sent him to sleep. We shall have no time this evening, said he, spreading out his prettiest umbrella over the child. Look at these Chinese. And then the whole umbrella appeared like a large china bowl with blue trees and pointed bridges upon which stood little Chinamen nodding their heads. We must make all the world beautiful for tomorrow morning, said Ole-Luk-Oie, for it will be a holiday. It is Sunday. I must now go to the church steeple and see if the little sprites who live there have polished the bells so that they may sound sweetly. Then I must go into the fields and see if the wind has blown the dust from the grass and the leaves, and the most difficult task of all which I have to do is to take down all the stars and brighten them up. I have to number them first before I put them in my apron, and also to number the places from which I take them, so that they may go back into the right holes, or else they would not remain. And we should have a number of falling stars, for they would all tumble down, one after the other. Hark ye, Mr. Luke-Oie, said an old portrait, which hung on the wall of Hjalmar's bedroom. Do you know me? I am Hjalmar's great-grandfather. I thank you for telling the boy stories, but you must not confuse his ideas. The stars cannot be taken down from the sky and polished. They are spheres, like our earth, which is a good thing for them. "Thank you, old great-grandfather," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "I thank you. You may be the head of the family, as no doubt you are, but I am older than you. I am an ancient heathen. The old Romans and Greeks named me the dream god. I have visited the noblest houses and continue to do so. Still, I know how to conduct myself, both to high and low. And now you may tell the stories yourself." And so Ole-Luk-Oie walked off, taking his umbrellas with him. "Well, well, one is never to give an opinion, I suppose," grumbled the portrait, and it woke Hjalmar. Sunday. "Good evening," said Ole-Luk-Oie. Hjalmar nodded, and then sprang out of bed and turned his great-grandfather's portrait to the wall so that it might not interrupt them as it had done yesterday. "Now," said he, "you must tell me some stories about 5 green peas that lived in one pod, or of the chick seed that courted the chickweed, or of the darning needle who acted so proudly because she fancied herself an embroidery needle. You may have too much of a good thing," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "You know that I like best to show you something, so I will show you my brother. He is also called Ole-Luk-Oie, but he never visits anyone but once, and when he does come, he takes him away on his horse and tells him stories as they ride along. He knows only 2 stories. One of these is so wonderfully beautiful that no one in the world can imagine anything at all like it. But the other is just as ugly and frightful, so that it would be impossible to describe it." Then Ole-Luk-Oie lifted Hjalmar up to the window. "There now you can see my brother, the other Ole-Luk-Oie. He is also called Death. You perceive he is not so bad as they represent him in picture books. There he is a skeleton, but now his coat is embroidered with silver, and he wears the splendid uniform of a hussar, and a mantle of black velvet flies behind him over the horse. Look how he gallops along." Hjalmar saw that as this Ole-Luk-Oie rode on, he lifted up old and young and carried them away on his horse. Some he seated in front of him, and some behind, but always inquired asked, "How stands the mark book?" "Good," they all answered. "Yes, but let me see for myself," he replied, and they were obliged to give him the books. Then all those who had very good or exceedingly good came in front of the horse and heard the beautiful story, while those who had middling or tolerably good in their books were obliged to sit behind and listen to the frightful tale. They trembled and cried and wanted to jump down from the horse, but they could not get free, for they seemed fastened to the seat. "Why, Death is a most splendid." "Luk-Oie," said Hjalmar, "I am not in the least afraid of him. You need have no fear of him. said Ole-Luk-Oie, "if you take care and keep a good conduct book." "Now I call that very instructive," murmured the great-grandfather's portrait. It is useful sometimes to express an opinion, so he was quite satisfied. These are some of the doings and sayings of Ole-Luk-Oie. I hope he may visit you himself this evening and relate some more. The Goblin and the Huckster. There was once a regular student who lived in a garret and had no possessions. And there was also a regular huckster to whom the house belonged and who occupied the ground floor. A goblin lived with the huckster because at Christmas he always had a large dish full of jam with a great piece of butter in the middle. The huckster could afford this, and therefore the goblin remained with the huckster, which was very cunning of him. One evening, the student came into the shop through the back door to buy candles and cheese for himself. He had no one to send, and therefore he came himself. He obtained what he wished, and then the huckster and his wife nodded good evening to him, and she was a woman who could do more than merely nod, for she had usually plenty to say for herself. The student nodded in return as he turned to leave, then suddenly stopped and began reading the piece of paper in which the cheese was wrapped. It was a leaf torn out of an old book, a book that ought not to have been torn up for. It was full of poetry. "Yonder lies some more of the same sort," said the huckster. "I gave an old woman a few coffee berries for it. You shall have the rest for 6 pence, if you will." "Indeed, I will," said the student. "Give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread and butter without cheese. It would be a sin to tear up a book like this. You are a clever man and a practical man, but you understand no more about poetry than that cask yonder." This was a very rude speech, especially against the cask, but the huckster and the student both laughed, for it was only said in fun. But the goblin felt very angry that any man should venture to say such things to a huckster who was a householder and sold the best butter. As soon as it was night, and the shop closed, and everyone in bed except the student, the goblin stepped softly into the bedroom where the huckster's wife slept and took away her tongue, which, of course, she did not then want. Whatever object in the room he placed his tongue upon immediately received voice and speech, and was able to express its thoughts and feelings as readily as the lady herself could do. It could only be used by one object at a time, which was a good thing, as a number speaking at once would have caused great confusion. The goblin laid the tongue upon the cask in which lay a quantity of old newspapers. "Is it really true," he asked, "that you do not know what poetry is?" "Of course I know," replied the cask. "Poetry is something that always stands in the corner of a newspaper and is sometimes cut out. And I may venture to affirm that I have more of it in me than the student has, and I am only a poor tub of the hucksters." Then the goblin placed the tongue on the coffee mill. And how it did go, to be sure. Then he put it on the butter tub and the cash box, and they all expressed the same opinion as the waste paper tub, and a majority must always be respected. "Now I shall go and tell," the student said the goblin, and with these words he went quietly up the back stairs to the garret where the student lived. He had a candle burning still, and the goblin peeped through the keyhole and saw that he was reading in the torn book which he had brought out of the shop. But how light the room was! From the book shot forth a ray of light which grew broad and full, like the stem of a tree, from which bright rays spread upward and over the student's head. Each leaf was fresh, and each flower was like a beautiful female head, some with dark and sparkling eyes, and others with eyes that were wonderfully blue and clear. The fruit gleamed like stars, and the room was filled with sounds of beautiful music. The little goblin had never imagined, much less seen or heard, of any sight so glorious as this. He stood still on tiptoe, peeping in till the light went out in the garret. The student, no doubt, had blown out his candle and gone to bed. But the little goblin remained standing there, nevertheless, and listening to the music, which still sounded on soft and beautiful, a sweet cradle song for the student who had lain down to rest. "This is a wonderful place," said the goblin. "I never expected such a thing. I should like to stay here with the student." And the little man thought it over, for he was a sensible little spirit. At last he sighed, but the student has no jam, so he went downstairs again into the huckster's shop, and it was a good thing he got back when he did, for the cask had almost worn out the lady's tongue. He had given a description of all that he contained on one side, and was just about to turn himself over to the other side to describe what was there, when the goblin entered and restored the tongue to the lady. But from that time forward, the whole shop, from the cash box down to the pine wood logs, formed their opinions from that of the cask, and they all had such confidence in him and treated him with so much respect that when the huckster read the criticisms on theatricals and art of an evening, they fancied it must all come from the cask. But after what he had seen, the goblin could no longer sit and listen quietly to the wisdom and understanding downstairs. So as soon as the evening light glimmered in the garret, he took courage, for it seemed to him as if the rays of light were strong cables drawing him up and obliging him to go and peep through the keyhole. And while there, a feeling of vastness came over him, such as we experience by the ever-moving sea when the storm breaks forth. And it brought tears into his eyes. He did not himself know why he wept, yet a kind of pleasant feeling mingled with his tears. How wonderfully glorious it would be to sit with the student under such a tree. But that was out of the question. He must be content to look through the keyhole and be thankful for even that. There he stood on the old landing, with the autumn wind blowing down upon him through the trap door. It was very cold, but the little creature did not really feel it till the light in the garret went out and the tones of music died away. Then how he shivered and crept downstairs again to his warm corner, where it felt home-like and comfortable. And when Christmas came again and brought the dish of jam and the great lump of butter, he liked the huckster best of all. Soon after, in the middle of the night, the goblin was awoke by a terrible noise and knocking against the window shutters and the house doors, and by the sound of the watchman's horn. For a great fire had broken out, and the whole street appeared full of flames. Was it in their house or a neighbor's? No one could tell, for terror had seized upon all. The huckster's wife was so bewildered that she took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket, that she might save something at least. The huckster ran to get his business papers, and the servant resolved to save her blue silk mantle, which she had managed to buy. Each wished to keep the best things they had. The goblin had the same wish, for with one spring he was upstairs and in the student's room, whom he found standing by the open window and looking quite calmly at the fire, which was raging at the house of a neighbor opposite. The goblin caught up the wonderful book which lay on the table and popped it into his red cap, which he held tightly with both hands. The greatest treasure in the house was saved, and he ran away with it to the roof and seated himself on the chimney. The flames of the burning house opposite illuminated him as he sat, both hands pressed tightly over his cap in which the treasure lay. And then he found out what feelings really reigned in his heart and knew exactly which way they tended. And yet, when the fire was extinguished and the goblin again began to reflect, he hesitated and said, "At last, I must divide myself between the two. I cannot quite give up the huckster because of the jam. And this is a representation of human nature. We are like the goblin. We all go to visit the huckster because of the jam." A picture from the Ramparts. It is autumn. We stand on the ramparts and look out over the sea. We look at the numerous ships and at the Swedish coast on the opposite side of the Sound, rising far above the surface of the waters, which mirror the glow of the evening sky. Behind us, the wood is sharply defined. Mighty trees surround us, and the yellow leaves flutter down from the branches. Below, at the foot of the wall, stands a gloomy-looking building enclosed in palisades. The space between is dark and narrow, but still more dismal. Must it be behind the iron gratings in the wall, which cover the narrow loopholes or windows? For in these dungeons, the most depraved of the criminals are confined. A ray of the setting sun shoots into the bare cells of one of the captives, for God's sun shines upon the evil and the good. The hardened criminal casts an impatient look at the bright ray. Then a little bird flies towards the grating, for birds twitter to the just as well as to the unjust. He only cries, "Tweet, tweet," and then perches himself near the grating, flutters, his wings pecks a feather from one of them, puffs himself out, and sets his feathers on end round his breast and throat. The bad chained man looks at him, and a more gentle expression comes into his hard face. In his breast there rises a thought which he himself cannot rightly analyze. But the thought has some connection with the sunbeam, with the bird, and with the scent of violets, which grow luxuriantly in spring at the foot of the wall. Then there comes the sound of the hunter's horn, merry and full. The little bird starts and flies away. The sunbeam gradually vanishes, and again there is darkness in the room and in the heart of that bad man. Still the sun has shone into that heart, and the twittering of the bird has touched it. Sound on ye glorious strains of the hunter's horn, continue your stirring tones, for the evening is mild, and the surface of the sea, heaving slowly and calmly, is smooth as a mirror. The loveliest rose in the world. There lived once a great queen, in whose garden were found at all seasons the most splendid flowers, and from every land in the world. She specially loved roses, and therefore she possessed the most beautiful varieties of this flower, from the wild hedgerows with its apple-scented leaves to the splendid Provence rose. They grew near the shelter of the walls, wound themselves round columns and window frames, crept along passages, and over the ceilings of the halls. They were of every fragrance and color. But care and sorrow dwelt within these halls. The queen lay upon a sick bed, and the doctors declared that she must die. There is still one thing that could save her, said one of the wisest among them. Bring her the loveliest rose in the world, one which exhibits the purest and brightest love. And if it is brought to her before her eyes close, she will not die. Then from all parts came those who brought roses that bloomed in every garden, but they were not the right sort. The flower must be one from the garden of love. But which of the roses there showed forth the highest and purest love? The poets sang of this rose, the loveliest in the world, and each named one which he considered worthy of that title. And intelligence of what was required was sent far and wide to every heart that beat with love, to every class, age, and condition. No one has yet named the flower, said the wise man. No one has pointed out the spot where it blooms in all its splendor. It is not a rose from the coffin of Romeo and Juliet, or from the grave of Walberg, though these roses will live in everlasting song. It is not one of the roses which sprouted forth from the blood-stained fame of Winkelried, the blood which flows from the breast of a hero who dies for his country is sacred, and his memory is sweet, and no rose can be redder than the blood which flows from his veins. Neither is it the magic flower of science, to obtain which wondrous flower a man devotes many an hour of his fresh young life in sleepless nights in a lonely chamber. I know where it blooms, said a happy mother, who came with her lovely child to the bedside of the queen. I know where the loveliest rose in the world is. It is seen on the blooming cheeks of my sweet child when it expresses the pure and holy love of infancy. When refreshed by sleep, it opens its eyes and smiles upon me with childlike affection. This is a lovely rose, said the wise man, but there is one still more lovely. Yes, one far more lovely, said one of the women. I have seen it, and a loftier and purer rose does not bloom. But it was white like the leaves of a blush rose. I saw it on the cheeks of the queen. She had taken off her golden crown, and through the long, dreary night, she carried her sick child in her arms. She wept over it, kissed it, and prayed for it, as only a mother can pray in that hour of her anguish. Holy and wonderful in its might is the white rose of grief, but it is not the one we seek. No, the loveliest rose in the world I saw at the Lord's table, said the good old bishop. I saw it shine as if an angel's face had appeared. A young maiden knelt at the altar and renewed the vows made at her baptism. And there were white roses and red roses on the blushing cheeks of that young girl. She looked up to heaven with all the purity and love of her young spirit, in all the expression of the highest and purest love. May she be blessed, said the wise man. But no one has yet named the loveliest rose in the world. Then there came into the room a child, the queen's little son. Tears stood in his eyes and glistened on his cheeks. He carried a great book, and the binding was of velvet with silver clasps. Mother, cried the little boy, only hear what I have read. And the child seated himself by the bedside and read from the book of him who suffered death on the cross to save all men, even who are yet unborn. He read, "Greater love hath no man than this." And as he read, a roseate hue spread over the cheeks of the queen, and her eyes became so enlightened and clear that she saw from the leaves of the book a lovely rose spring forth, a type of him who shed his blood on the cross. "I see it," she said. "He who beholds this, the loveliest rose on earth, shall never die." Aunty. You ought to have known Aunty. She was so lovely. And yet, to be more specific, she wasn't lovely in the usual sense of the word, but she was sweet and charming and funny in her own way. Just the type to gossip about when one is in the mood to gossip and be facetious over someone. She should have been put in a play just because she herself simply lived for the theater and everything that goes on in it. She was so very respectable, even if Agent Nob, whom Aunty called Snob, said she was stage-struck. "The theater is my schoolroom," she said, "my fountain of knowledge. There I have brushed up on my old biblical history. Take Moses, for instance, or Joseph and his brethren. They're operas now. It is from the theater that I've gained my knowledge of world history, geography, and human nature. I've learned about Parisian life from French farces. It's naughty, but very interesting. How I have cried over the Riquebourg family. To think that the husband had to drink himself to death just so his wife could get her young sweetheart. Ah yes, many's the tear I've shed in the 50 years I've been going to the theater. Aunty knew every play, every piece of scenery, every actor who came on, or ever had come on. She really only lived during the 9 months of the theatrical season. A summer without a summer stock company was enough to age her, while an evening at the theater that lasted till past midnight prolonged her life. She didn't say, as people did, "Now we will have spring. The stork has come," or "There's an item in the paper about the early strawberries." Instead, she announced the coming of autumn. "Have you seen that the box office is open? They'll begin the performances soon." She reckoned the value of a house and its location by its distance from the theater. She was heartbroken to have to leave the narrow alley behind the theater and move to a wide street a little farther away and live in a house where there were no neighbors opposite her. At home, my window must be my box at the theater. You can't sit by yourself without ever seeing people. But where I live now, it seems as if I've moved way out into the country. If I want to see people, I have to go into the kitchen and climb up onto the sink. That's the only way I can see my neighbors. Now in that old alley of mine, I could look right into the linen dealers, and then I was only 3 steps from the theater. Now I am 3,000 steps away. A guardsman's steps at that. Aunty might sometimes be ill, but however badly she happened to feel, she never missed the theater. One evening, her doctor ordered her to put her feet in sourdough poultices. She did as he told her, but rode off to the theater and sat there with her feet in sourdough. If she had died there, it would have pleased her. Thorvaldsen died in the theater, and she called that a blessed death. She could not imagine heaven if there were no theater there. Indeed, it was never promised to us, but it surely was conceivable that the many great actors and actresses who had gone on before would want to continue their work. Aunty had her own private wire from the theater to her room, and the telegram came every Sunday for coffee. Her private wire was Mr. Sivertson of the stage setting department. It was he who gave the signal for the raising and lowering of the curtain, the setting or striking of the scenery. From him, she received a brief, expressive report of each of the plays. Shakespeare's Tempest he called detestable stuff. There's so much to set up. Why it begins with water, down to the first side drop, that is to say, the rolling billows extended far forward on the stage. On the other hand, if a play could go through 5 acts in one and the same set, he said it was sensible and well written. It was a play of rest that could play itself without all that setting up to do. In the earlier days, Aunty recalled meaning some 30-odd years back, when she and Mr. Sivertson were indeed much younger. He was then already in the mechanical department, and as she called him, her benefactor. At that time, it was customary at the town's big and only theater to admit spectators into the cockloft. Every stage carpenter had 1 or 2 places to dispose of. It was often filled to capacity, and with a very select company. It was said the wives of generals and councilmen had been there because it was so interesting to look down behind the scenes and see how the performers stood and moved when the curtain was down. Aunty had been there several times to tragedies and ballets for the productions requiring the largest casts were the most interesting to watch from the loft. You sat up there in almost complete darkness, and most people brought their suppers with them. But once, 3 apples and a package of sandwiches filled with sausage fell straight down into the prison where Ugolino was about to die of hunger. The sausage produced a tremendous effect. The audience laughed and cheered, and the sausage was one of the main reasons why the management decided to forbid admission to the cockloft. But still, I've been there 37 times, said Aunty. And for that, I shall always be grateful to Mr. Sivertson. On the last evening that the cockloft was open to the public, they were giving the Judgment of Solomon. Aunty could remember it so well, for from her benefactor, Mr. Sivertson, she had obtained a ticket for Agent Nob. Not that he deserved it, for he always made fun of the theater and teased her about it. But still, she had got him a seat in the cockloft. He wanted to look at the goings-on in the theater upside down. Those were his very words, and just like him, said Aunty. And so he saw the Judgment of Solomon from above, and fell asleep. One would surely have thought that he had come from a big dinner and had drunk many toasts. He slept until after the theater was locked up, and had to spend the whole dark night up in the loft. He had a story to tell of his waking up, but Aunty didn't believe a word of it. The Judgment of Solomon was played out, the lights were out, and all the people were out above and below. But then began the epilogue, the real comedy, the best thing of all, according to the agent. Then life came into the properties, and it wasn't the Judgment of Solomon that was given now. No, it was Judgment Day at the theater. All this Agent Nob impudently tried to cram into Aunty. That was her thanks for getting him into the cockloft. The story the agent told was amusing enough to hear, but there were mockery and spite behind it. It was very dark up there, said the agent. But then the witchery began, the great spectacle. Judgment Day at the theater. Ticket takers were at the doors, and every spectator had to show his spiritual testimonial to decide whether he could enter free or handcuffed, and with or without a muzzle. Fine society people who came too late after the performance had begun, and young fellows who wasted their time were hitched outside. There they were, muzzled, and had felt soles put under their shoes to walk in on in time for the beginning of the next scene. And then they began Judgment Day at the theater. Purely wickedness, said Aunty, which our Lord knows nothing about. Had the scene painter wanted to get into heaven, he would have had to climb up some stairs he had painted himself, but which were too steep for anybody to use. That, of course, was because of his sin against perspective. The stage carpenter, who had placed the plants and buildings in lands where they didn't belong, had to move them into their proper places before cock-crowing time if he expected to go to heaven. Mr. Nob would have to watch his own chances of getting there. And to hear what he said about the actors, both in comedy and tragedy, or in song and dance, why, it was shameful of Mr. Nob. Mr. Nob, he never deserved his place in the cockloft. Aunty didn't believe a word of what he said. He had written it all out, he said, the snob, and would have it printed, but not until he was dead and buried, since he had no wish to be skinned alive. Only once had Aunty known terror and anguish in her own temple of happiness, the theater. It was one of those gray winter days when we have only 2 hours of foggy daylight. It was cold and snowing, but Aunty was bound for the theater. They were giving Hermann von Una, besides a little opera, and a grand ballet with prologue and epilogue. It would last well into the night. Aunty had to be there. Her lodger had lent her a pair of sleigh boots, shaggy both outside and inside, that reached all the way up her legs. Aunty arrived at the theater and was seated in a box. The boots felt warm, so she kept them on. Suddenly, there arose the cry of fire as smoke rolled from one of the wings, and down from the cockloft there was a fearful panic, and people stormed out. Aunty was sitting farthest from the door, second tier left, hand side. From there, the decorations look best, she said. They always arrange them so they will look the prettiest from the king's side of the house. Now she wanted to get out of there, but the excited people in front of her thoughtlessly slammed and jammed the door shut. There was Aunty, with no way out and no way in, for the partitions between the boxes were too high. She called for help, but nobody heard her. When she looked over at the tier beneath, she saw it was empty. The balustrade was low, and the drop wasn't very far. Her fright made her feel young and active, so she prepared to jump. She got one foot on the seat and the other over the railing. There she sat, astride, well draped in her flowered skirt, with one long leg dangling below a leg in a huge sleigh boot. That was a sight to see, and it was seen when finally her cries were heard. And then she was easily rescued, for the fire didn't amount to much. That was the most memorable evening of her life, she said, and she was glad she hadn't seen herself, for she would have died of shame. Her benefactor in the mechanical department, Mr. Sivertson, came to see her regularly every Sunday. But it was a long time between Sundays. So in later years, in the middle of the week, a small child would come to her for the leavings. That is, to get her supper from the remains of Auntie's dinner. This little child was a member of the ballet who really needed the food. She played the roles of a page or a fairy, but her hardest part was the hind legs of the lion in Mozart's tragic flute. She eventually grew up to become the front legs, but for this she was paid only 3 marks, while as the hind legs she had received 1 Rix dollar. She had had to creep about as the hind legs stooping, panting for fresh air. This was very interesting to know, thought Aunty. Aunty deserved to have lived as long as the theater itself, but she couldn't hold out that long, nor did she die in the theater, but quietly and decently in her own bed. Her dying words were full of significance. She asked, "What are they playing tomorrow?" She must have left about 500 rix dollars. We came to that conclusion from the yearly rental, which amounted to 20 rix dollars. The money was left by Aunty as a legacy for some deserving old spinster who had no family. It was to be used for a seat in the second tier left side every Saturday, for that was when they gave the best plays. There was only one condition imposed on the legatee. As she sat in the theater every Saturday, she was to think of Aunty lying in her grave. This was Auntie's religion. The brave tin soldier. There were once 20 tin soldiers, who were all brothers, for they had been made out of the same old tin spoon. They shouldered arms and looked straight before them, and wore a splendid uniform, red and blue. The first thing in the world they ever heard were the words "tin soldiers," uttered by a little boy who clapped his hand with delight when the lid of the box in which they lay was taken off. They were given him for a birthday present, and he stood at the table to set them up. The soldiers were all exactly alike, excepting one who had only one leg. He had been left to the last, and then there was not enough of the melted tin to finish him, so they made him stand firmly on one leg, and this caused him to be very remarkable. The table on which the tin soldiers stood was covered with other playthings, but the most attractive to the eye was a pretty little paper castle. Through the small windows, the rooms could be seen. In front of the castle, a number of little trees surrounded a piece of looking glass, which was intended to represent a transparent lake. Swans made of wax swam on the lake and were reflected in it. All this was very pretty, but the prettiest of all was a tiny little lady who stood at the open door of the castle. She also was made of paper, and she wore a dress of clear muslin with a narrow blue ribbon over her shoulders, just like a scarf. In front of these was fixed a glittering tinsel rose as large as her whole face. The little lady was a dancer, and she stretched out both her arms and raised one of her legs so high that the tin soldier could not see it at all. And he thought that she, like himself, had only one leg. That is the wife for me, he thought. But she is too grand and lives in a castle, while I have only a box to live in 25 of us all together. That is no place for her. Still, I must try and make her acquaintance. Then he laid himself at full length on the table behind a snuff box that stood upon it, so that he could peep at the little delicate lady who continued to stand on one leg without losing her balance. When evening came, the other tin soldiers were all placed in the box, and the people of the house went to bed. Then the playthings began to have their own games together, to pay visits, to have sham fights, and to give balls. The tin soldiers rattled in their box. They wanted to get out and join the amusements, but they could not open the lid. The nutcrackers played at leapfrog, and the pencil jumped about the table. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk, and in poetry too. Only the tin soldier and the dancer remained in their places. She stood on tiptoe, with her legs stretched out as firmly as he did on his one leg. He never took his eyes from her for even a moment. The clock struck 12, and with a bounce up sprang the lid of the snuff box. But instead of snuff, there jumped up a little black goblin, for the snuff box was a toy puzzle. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "don't wish for what does not belong to you." But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "Very well, wait till tomorrow." Then said the goblin. When the children came in the next morning, they placed the tin soldier in the window. Now whether it was the goblin who did it, or the draft, is not known, but the window flew open, and out fell the tin soldier, heels over head, from the 3rd story into the street beneath. It was a terrible fall, for he came head downwards, his helmet and his bayonet stuck in between the flagstones, and his one leg up in the air. The servant maid and the little boy went downstairs directly to look for him, but he was nowhere to be seen, although once they nearly trod upon him. If he had called out, "Here I am," it would have been all right, but he was too proud to cry out for help while he wore a uniform. Presently, it began to rain, and the drops fell faster and faster till there was a heavy shower. When it was over, 2 boys happened to pass by, and one of them said, "Look, there is a tin soldier. He ought to have a boat to sail in." So they made a boat out of a newspaper and placed the tin soldier in it and sent him sailing down the gutter, while the 2 boys ran by the side of it and clapped their hands. Good gracious! What large waves arose in that gutter, and how fast the stream rolled on, for the rain had been very heavy. The paper boat rocked up and down, and turned itself round sometimes so quickly that the tin soldier trembled. Yet he remained firm. His countenance did not change. He looked straight before him and shouldered his musket. Suddenly, the boat shot under a bridge which formed a part of a drain, and then it was as dark as the tin soldier's box. "Where am I going now?" thought he. "This is the black goblin's fault, I am sure. Ah well, if the little lady were only here with me in the boat, I should not care for any darkness." Suddenly, there appeared a great water rat who lived in the drain. "Have you a passport?" asked the rat. "Give it to me at once." But the tin soldier remained silent and held his musket tighter than ever. The boat sailed on, and the rat followed it. How he did gnash his teeth and cry out to the bits of wood and straw, "Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid toll and has not shown his pass." But the stream rushed on stronger and stronger. The tin soldier could already see daylight shining where the arch ended. Then he heard a roaring sound, quite terrible enough to frighten the bravest man. At the end of the tunnel, the drain fell into a large canal over a steep place, which made it as dangerous for him as a waterfall would be to us. He was too close to it to stop, so the boat rushed on, and the poor tin soldier could only hold himself as stiffly as possible, without moving an eyelid, to show that he was not afraid. The boat whirled round 3 or 4 times, and then filled with water to the very edge. Nothing could save it from sinking. He now stood up to his neck in water, while deeper and deeper sank the boat, and the paper became soft and loose with the wet, till at last the water closed over the soldier's head. He thought of the elegant little dancer, whom he should never see again, and the words of the song sounded in his ears. "Farewell, warrior, ever brave, drifting onward to thy grave." Then the paper boat fell to pieces, and the soldier sank into the water, and immediately afterwards was swallowed up by a great fish. Oh, how dark it was inside the fish! A great deal darker than in the tunnel, and narrower too. But the tin soldier continued firm, and lay at full length, shouldering his musket. The fish swam to and fro, making the most wonderful movements, but at last he became quite still. After a while, a flash of lightning seemed to pass through him, and then the daylight approached, and a voice cried out, "I declare, here is the tin soldier." The fish had been caught, taken to the market, and sold to the cook, who took him into the kitchen and cut him open with a large knife. She picked up the soldier and held him by the waist between her finger and thumb, and carried him into the room. They were all anxious to see this wonderful soldier who had traveled about inside a fish, but he was not at all proud. They placed him on the table, and how many curious things do happen in the world. There he was, in the very same room from the window of which he had fallen. There were the same children, the same playthings standing on the table, and the pretty castle with the elegant little dancer at the door. She still balanced herself on one leg and held up the other, so she was as firm as himself. It touched the tin soldier so much to see her that he almost wept tin tears, but he kept them back. He only looked at her and they both remained silent. Presently, one of the little boys took up the tin soldier and threw him into the stove. He had no reason for doing so, therefore it must have been the fault of the black goblin who lived in the snuff box. The flames lighted up the tin soldier as he stood. The heat was very terrible, but whether it proceeded from the real fire or from the fire of love, he could not tell. Then he could see that the bright colors were faded from his uniform, but whether they had been washed off during his journey or from the effects of his sorrow, no one could say. He looked at the little lady, and she looked at him. He felt himself melting away, but he still remained firm with his gun on his shoulder. Suddenly, the door of the room flew open, and the draft of air caught up the little dancer. She fluttered like a sylph right into the stove by the side of the tin soldier, and was instantly in flames, and was gone. The tin soldier melted down into a lump, and the next morning, when the maid-servant took the ashes out of the stove, she found him in the shape of a little tin heart. But of the little dancer, nothing remained but the tinsel rose, which was burnt black as a cinder. The Great Sea Serpent. There was a little sea fish of good family, the name of which I don't remember, that the more learned will have to tell you. This little fish had 1,800 brothers and sisters, all the same age. They didn't know their father or mother, so they had to care for themselves and swim about on their own. But that was a lot of fun. They had plenty of water to drink, the entire ocean. They didn't think about their food. That was sure to come their way. Each did as he pleased. Each would have his own story. But then, none of them thought about that. The sun shone down into the water, making it light and clear. It was a world full of the strangest creatures, some of them enormously big, with great, horrible mouths that could sallow all the 1,800 brothers and sisters. But none of them thought about that either, for none of them had ever been swallowed. The little ones swam together, close to one another, as the herring and the mackerel swim. As they were swimming along at their best, and thinking of nothing in particular, there sank from above, down into the midst of them, with a terrifying noise, a long, heavy thing which seemed to have no end to it. Further and further, it stretched out, and every one of the small fish that it struck was crushed, or got a crack from which he couldn't recover. All the fishes, the small and the big as well, were thrown into a panic. That heavy, horrible thing sank deeper and deeper, and grew longer and longer, extending for miles through the entire ocean. Fishes and snails, everything that swims, everything that creeps or is driven by the currents, saw this fearful thing, this enormous unknown sea eel, that all of a sudden had come from above. What kind of thing was it? Yes, we know. It was the great telegraph cable that people were laying between Europe and America. There were great fear and commotion among all the rightful inhabitants of the ocean where the cable was laid. The flying fish shot up above the surface as high as he could, and the blowfish sped off like a gunshot across the water, for it can do that. Other fishes went to the bottom of the ocean with such haste that they reached it long before the telegraph cable was seen down there. And they scared both the codfish and the flounder, who lived peacefully at the bottom of the ocean and ate their neighbors. A couple of the starfish were so frightened that they turned their stomachs inside out. But in spite of that, they lived, for they can do that. Many of the lobsters and crabs got out of their fine shells and had to leave their legs behind. In all this fright and confusion, the 1,800 brothers and sisters had all become separated, never again to know or even meet each other, excepting 10 of them who had remained at the same place, and after these had held themselves still for a couple of hours, they recovered from their first fright and began to be curious. They looked about, they looked up, and they looked down, and there in the deep, they thought they saw the frightful thing that had scared them, scared everyone, big and little. There it lay along the bottom of the ocean, extending as far as they could see. It was quite thin, but then they didn't know how thick it could make itself or how strong it was. It lay very quiet, but that they thought could be a trick. Let it lie where it is. It doesn't concern us, said the most cautious of the little fish, but the very smallest one of them insisted on gaining some knowledge as to what that thing might be. It had come down from above, so above, one could best find out about it. And so they swam up to the surface, where there was calm weather. There they met a dolphin, which is a sort of jumping jack, an ocean rover that can turn somersaults in the water, as these have eyes to see. With, he must have seen what had happened and should know all about it. They inquired, but the dolphin had only been thinking of himself, and his somersaults had seen nothing, and didn't know what to answer, so he kept quiet and looked proud. Thereupon they turned to the seal, who had just ducked down. He was more polite, although seals eat small fishes. For today, he had had his fill. He knew a little more than the dolphin. Many a night I have rested on a wet rock and looked far inland, miles away from here. There live some sneaky creatures who in their language are called people. They plot against us, but often we slip away from them, which I know how to do. And that is what the sea eel has done too. He has been in their power up there on the earth for a long, long time. And from there, they carried him off on a ship to bring him across the ocean to a distant land. I saw what trouble they had, but they could manage him because he had become weak on the earth. They laid him down in quoisoles and circles. I heard how he wringled and wrangled when they put him down, but still he got away from them. They held on to him with all their might. Many hands held fast, but still he slipped away from them and reached the bottom. There he lies now for a while, at least, I think. He is rather thin, said all the little fish. They have starved him, said the seal, but he will soon be himself again, fat and big around. I suppose he is the Great Sea Serpent that people are so afraid of and talk so much about. I had never seen him before and never believed he existed, but now I do. I'm sure he's the sea serpent. And with that, the seal dove down. How much he knew. How much he talked, said all the little fish. We have never been so enlightened before. If only it isn't all a lie. We could swim down and investigate, said the smallest fish. On the way, we can hear what others think about it. We're not going to move a fin to find out anything more, said the others, and swam away. But I'm going to, said the smallest, and plunged down into deep water. But the little fish was a considerable distance from the place where that long sunken thing lay. He looked and searched in a direction down in the deep water. Never before had he imagined the world to be so big. The herrings swam in great masses, each school of them shining like a mighty boat of silver. The mackerel also swam together and looked even more magnificent. There were fishes of all shapes and with markings in all colors. Jellyfish, like half-transparent flowers, simply lay back and let the currents carry them along. Great plants grew up from the bottom of the ocean, as did fathom-high grass and palm-shaped trees, every leaf beset with shining shellfish. At last, the little fish saw a long, dark streak way down and swam toward it. But it was neither fish nor cable. It was the gunwale of a large, sunken vessel, the upper and lower decks of which had been broken in two by the force of the ocean. The little fish swam inside, where the many people who had perished with the sinking of the ship had since been washed away, except for two. Young woman lay stretched out with a little child in her arms. The water rocked them to and fro, and they seemed to be asleep. The little fish became quite frightened, for he didn't know that they never again could awaken. Seaweed hung like cultivated foliage over the rail above the fair forms of mother and child. It was so quiet there, so lonely. The little fish hurried away as fast as he could, out to where the water was clearer, and there were fishes to see. He hadn't gone far when he met a young and terribly large whale. "Don't swallow me," said the little fish. "I'm so small that I'm not even a tiny bite, and it's a great pleasure for me to live." "What do you want, way down here where your kind never comes?" asked the whale. So the little fish told of the strange, long eel, or whatever that thing was, which had sunk and scared even the most courageous of ocean creatures. "Ho, ho," said the whale, and drew in such a lot of water that he had to make an enormous water spout when he came to the surface for a breath. "Ho, ho," he said. So that was the thing that tickled my back. When I turned around, I thought it was a ship's mast that I could use for a back scratcher. However, it wasn't in this location. No, that thing is much farther out. I'll investigate it, though. I have nothing else to do." And so he swam forth, the little fish following, but not too close, for there would be a powerful stream where the big whale shot through the water. They met a shark and an old sawfish. These two had also heard of the strange sea eel that was so long and thin. They hadn't seen it, but they wanted to. Then a catfish appeared. "I'm coming with you," he said, and took the same course. "If the Great Sea Serpent isn't thicker than a cable, then I'll bite it in two with one bite." And he opened his mouth and showed his 6 rows of teeth. "I can bite dents in a ship's anchor, so I can easily bite through that stem." "There it is," said the big whale. "I can see it." He thought he saw better than the others. "See how it rises. See how it sways, bends, and curves." However, this was not the sea serpent, but an exceptionally large eel who was many yards long and came closer. "I've seen him before," said the sawfish. "He's never made much fuss in the ocean here, or frightened any big fishes." And so they talked to him about the new eel and asked if he wanted to join them on their voyage of discovery. "If that eel is longer than I said the sea eel, then something unfortunate will happen." "That it will," said the others. "There are enough of us not to have to tolerate it." And then they hurried along. But now, directly in their way, there appeared a strange monster, bigger than them all. It looked like a floating island that could not hold itself up. It was a very old whale. His head was overgrown with seaweed, his back beset with barnacles, and so many oysters and mussels that his black skin was entirely covered with white spots. "Come along, old fellow," they said. "A new fish has come that we will not tolerate." "I'd rather lie where I am," said the old whale. "Leave me in peace. Let me lie. Oh my, I suffer from a dreadful sickness. The only relief I have is when I go up to the surface and get my back above it. Then the big, nice birds come and pick at me, and that feels so good, as long they don't drive their beaks in too far. Often, they go right into my blubber. Just see for yourself. There is a complete skeleton of a bird stuck in my back. That bird struck his claws in too deep and couldn't get loose when I went down to the bottom. Now the little fishes have eaten him. Just see how he looks, and how I look. I have a sickness. That's just imagination, said the other whale. I am never sick. No fish is sick. I beg your pardon, said the old whale. The eel has a skin disease, the carp has smallpox, and all of us have intestinal worms. Nonsense, said the shark, and didn't care to hear more. Nor did the others. They had something else to do. Finally, they came to the place where the telegraph cable lay. It had a very long resting place, indeed, at the bottom of the ocean, from Europe to America, over sandbanks and sea mud, rocky formations, and sea plant wilderness, and yes, entire forests of coral. The currents down there change, and whirlpools twist around. Fishes crowd each other and swim in flocks greater than the countless multitudes of birds that people see when birds of passage are in flight. There are a commotion, a splashing, a humming, and a rushing. A little of that rushing still remains to haunt the big, empty conch shells when we hold them to our ears. Yes, now they came to the place. There lies the animal, said the big fishes, and the little one said so too. They saw the cable, its beginning and end beyond their horizon. Sponges, polyps, and seaweed swayed from the ground, rising and falling over the cable, so that now it was hidden and then visible again. See, porcupines, snails, and worms moved over it. Gigantic spiders, with whole fringes of vermin on them, crawled along the cable. Dark blue sea sausages, or whatever the creatures are called, that eat with their entire bodies, lay beside it, and smelled this new animal that had come down to lie at the bottom of the ocean. Flounders and codfish turned about in the water in order to hear what was said from all sides. The starfish, who could hold himself down in the mud and keep his eyes outside, lay and stared to see what would come of all this confusion. The telegraph cable lay motionless, but life and thought were in it. Human thoughts went through it. That thing is cunning, said the whale. It's able to hit me in the stomach, and that's my weak point. Let's feel our way, said a polyp. I have long arms. I have limber fingers. I have touched it. Now I'll feel it a little more firmly. And then he stretched his longest and most flexible arms down to the cable and around it. It has no scales, said the polyp. It has no skin. I don't believe it will ever bear young ones. The sea eel laid down alongside the telegraph cable and stretched himself as far as he could. "That thing is longer than I am," he said. "But it isn't length that counts. One must have skin, stomach, and flexibility. The whale, that is the young, strong whale, dove down deeper than he ever had been." "Are you a fish or a plant?" he asked the cable. "Or are you only some piece of work from above that can't thrive down here among us?" But the telegraph cable didn't answer. It had no means of contacting anyone at such a location. Thoughts were going through it. People's thoughts, which in a single second were heard from land to land, many hundreds of miles apart. "Will you answer, or do you want to be broken?" asked the fierce shark, and all the other big fishes asked the same. "Will you answer, or do you want to be broken?" The cable didn't move, but it had its own private thoughts, which it had a right to have, considering that it was filled with others' thoughts. "Let them break me. Then I'll be hauled up and put in order again. That has happened to others of my kind who were in shallower waters." And so it didn't answer. It had something else to do. It telegraphed, and thereby did its just duty at the bottom of the sea, Up above, the sun was going down, as people say. It blazed like the reddest fire, and all the clouds in the heavens glowed with a fiery hue, each more magnificent than the other. "Now we're getting the red lighting," said the polyps, "and we may be able to see the thing better if necessary." At it shouted the shark, showing all his teeth. At it said the swordfish and the whale and the sea eel. They rushed forward, the shark leading, but just as he was about to bite the cable, the swordfish, out of pure anxiety, ran his saw right into the back of the shark. That was a great mistake, and the shark had no strength left to bite. Everything became muddled in the mud. Big fishes, little fishes, sea sausages, and snails ran into one another, ate each other, clashed and gnashed. The cable lay still and attended to its own business, as one should do. The dark night brooded above, but in the ocean, the millions and millions of small living creatures lighted it. Crawfish, not even as big as a pinhead, gave out light. It is quite wondrous, but now that's the way it is. The ocean creatures looked at the telegraph cable. What is that thing? And what isn't it? Yes, that was the question. Presently, an old sea cow appeared. People call these mermaids or mermen. This one was a she, and had a tail and 2 short arms to splash with. She wore seaweed and parasites over her breasts and head, and she was proud of this. "Are you seeking knowledge and wisdom?" she said. "I am the only one who can give you this. But in return, I demand that you guarantee safe pasturage on the bottom of the ocean for me and mine. I am a fish like you are, but I am also a crawling animal through practice. I am the wisest in the ocean. I know about everything that moves down here and about all that goes on up above. That thing you are pondering over is from above, and whatever falls down from up there is dead, or will be dead and powerless. Let it lie there for what it is. It's only a man-made invention. I believe there is more to it than that, said the little fish. Hold your tongue. Mackerel, said the big sea cow. Stickleback, said the others, and that was even more insulting. And the sea cow explained further to them that this alarming thing, which as a matter of fact hadn't uttered a single sound, was in its entirety nothing more than some new device from the dry land. And she delivered a little lecture about people's deceitfulness. They want to catch us, she said. That's all they live for. They stretch out nets for us and come with bait on hooks to tempt us. That thing there is some sort of big string that they think we are going to bite. They are so stupid, but we are not. Don't touch that junk. In time, it will unravel and all turn to dust and mud. Everything that comes from up there, cracks and breaks, is good for nothing. Good for nothing, said the other ocean creatures, and held on to the sea cow's opinion so as to have an opinion. The little fish, however, had his own thoughts. Perhaps that enormously long, thin serpent is the most wonderful fish in the ocean. I have a feeling it is. The most wonderful, say we humans too, and we say it with knowledge and assurance. The Great Sea Serpent has long been the theme of song and story. It was conceived and born by man's ingenuity and laid on the bottom of the ocean, stretching from the eastern to the western lands and carrying messages as swiftly as light flashes from the sun to our earth. It grows in power, and length grows year after year through all oceans around the world. It is beneath the stormy seas and the glass-clear waters where the skipper, as if sailing through transparent air, looks down and sees crowds of fishes resembling many colored fireworks. Deepest down of all lies the outstretched serpent, a blessed Midgard snake, which bites its own tail as it encircles the earth. Fishes and other sea creatures clash with it. They do not understand that thing from above. People's thoughts rush noiselessly in all languages through the serpent of science for both good and evil. The most wondrous of the ocean's wonders is our times. What old Johanne told. The wind whistles in the old willow tree. It is as if one were hearing a song. The wind sings it. The tree tells it. If you do not understand it, then ask old Johanna in the poorhouse. She knows about it. she was born here in the parish. Many years ago, when the king's highway still lay along here, the tree was already large and conspicuous. It stood as it still stands in front of the tailor's whitewashed timber house close to the ditch, which then was so large that the cattle could be watered there, and where in the summertime the little peasant boys used to run about naked and paddle in the water. Underneath the tree stood a stone milepost cut from a big rock. Now it is overturned, and a bramble bush grows over it. The new King's Highway was built on the other side of the rich farmer's manor house. The old one became a field path. The ditch became a puddle overgrown with duckweed. If a frog tumbled down into it, the greenery was parted, and one saw the black water. All around it grew and still grow musk donora, buck bean, and yellow iris. The tailor's house was old and crooked. The roof was a hotbed for moss and house leek. The dovecot had collapsed, and starlings built their nests there. The swallows hung nest after nest on the house gable, and all along beneath the roof. It was just as if luck itself lived there, and once it had. Now, however, this was a lonely and silent place. Here in solitude lived weak-willed poor Rasmus, as they called him. He had been born here. He had played here, had leaped across meadow and over hedge, had splashed as a child in the ditch, and had climbed up the old tree. The tree would raise its big branches with pride and beauty, just as it raises them. But storms had already bent the trunk a little, and time had given it a crack. Wind and weather have since lodged earth in the crack, and there grow grass and greenery. Yes, and even a little serviceberry has planted itself there. When in spring the swallows came, they flew about the tree and the roof, and plastered and patched their old nests, while poor Rasmus let his nest stand or fall as it liked. His motto was, "What good will it do?" And it had been his father's too. He stayed in his home. The swallows flew away, but they always came back, the faithful creatures. The starling flew away, but it returned too, and whistled its song again. Once Rasmus had known how, but now he neither whistled nor sang. The wind whistled in the old willow tree, then just as it now whistles. Indeed, it is as if one were hearing a song. The wind sings it, the tree tells it. And if you do not understand it, then ask old Johanne in the poorhouse. She knows about it. She knows about everything of old. She is like a book of chronicles with inscriptions and old recollections. At the time, the house was new and good. The country tailor, Ivar Ulsa, and his wife Maren moved into it. industrious, honest folk, both of them. Old Johanne was then a child. She was the daughter of a wooden shoemaker, one of the poorest in the parish. Many a good sandwich did she receive from Maren, who was in no want of food. The lady of the manor house liked Maren, who was always laughing and happy and never downhearted. She used her tongue a good deal, but her hands also. She could sew as fast as she could use her mouth, and moreover, she cared for her house and children. There were nearly a dozen children, 11 altogether. The 12th never made its appearance. Poor people always have a nest full of youngsters, growled the master of the manor house. If one could drown them like kittens and keep only 1 or 2 of the strongest, it would be less of a misfortune. God have mercy, said the tailor's wife. Children are a blessing from God. They are such a delight in the house. Every child is one more Lord's Prayer. If times are bad, and one has many mouths to feed, why then a man works all the harder and finds out ways and means, honestly. Our Lord fails not when we do not fail. The lady of the manor house agreed with her. She nodded kindly and patted Maren's cheek. She had often done so, yes, and had kissed her as well. But that had been when the lady was a little child and Maren her nursemaid. The two were fond of each other, and this feeling did not wane. Each year at Christmas time, winter provisions would arrive at the tailor's house from the manor house. A barrel of meal, a pig, 2 geese, a tub of butter, cheese, and apples. That was indeed an asset to the larder. Ivar Olse looked quite pleased too, but soon came out with his old motto, "What good will it do?" The house was clean and tidy, with curtains in the windows, and flowers as well, both carnations and balsams. A sampler hung in a picture frame, and close by hung a love letter in rhyme, which Maren Olse herself had written. She knew how to put rhymes together. She was almost a little proud of the family name Olse. It was the only word in the Danish language that rhymed with pølse sausage. At least, that's an advantage to have over other people, she said, and laughed. She always kept her good humor, and never said, like her husband, "What good will it do?" Her motto was, "Depend on yourself and on our Lord." So she did, and that kept them all together. The children thrived, grew out over the nest, went out into the world, and prospered well. Rasmus was the smallest. He was such a pretty child that one of the great portrait painters in the capital had borrowed him to paint from, and in the picture he was as naked as when he had come into this world. That picture was now hanging in the king's palace. The lady of the manor house saw it and recognized little Rasmus, though he had no clothes on. But now came hard times. The tailor had rheumatism in both hands, on which great lumps appeared. No doctor could help him, not even the wise Stein, who herself did some doctoring. One must not be downhearted, said Marin. It never helps to hang the head. Now that we no longer have Father's 2 hands to help us, I must try to use mine all the faster. Little Rasmus, too, can use the needle. He was already sitting on the sewing table, whistling and singing. He was a happy boy. But he should not sit there the whole day long, said the mother. That would be a shame for the child. He should play and jump about too. The shoemaker's Johanne was his favorite playmate. Her folks were still poorer than Rasmus's. She was not pretty. She went about barefooted, and her clothes hung in rags, for she had no one to mend them, and to do it herself did not occur to her. She was a child, and as happy as a bird in our Lord's sunshine. By the stone milepost under the large willow tree, Rasmus and Johanne played. He had ambitious thoughts. He would one day become a fine tailor and live in the city where there were master tailors who had 10 workmen at the table. This he had heard from his father. There he would be an apprentice, and there he would become a master tailor. And then Johanne could come to visit him, and if by that time she knew how to cook, she could prepare the meals for all of them and have a large apartment of her own. Johanne dared not expect that, but Rasmus believed it could happen. They sat beneath the old tree, and the wind whistled in the branches and leaves. It seemed as if the wind were singing and the tree talking. In the autumn, every single leaf fell off. Rain dripped from the bare branches. They will be green again, said Mother Ulsa. What good will it do, said her husband. New year, new worries about our livelihood. The larder is full, said the wife. We can thank our good lady for that. I am healthy and have plenty of strength. It is sinful for us to complain. The master and lady of the manor house remained there in the country over Christmas, but the week after the New Year, they were to go to the city, where they would spend the winter in festivity and amusement. They would even go to a reception and ball given by the king himself. The lady had bought 2 rich dresses from France. They were of such material, of such fashion, and so well sewn that the tailor's Marin had never seen such magnificence. She asked the lady if she might come up to the house with her husband so that he could see the dresses as well. Such things had surely never been seen by a country tailor, she said. He saw them and had not a word to say until he returned home. And what he did say was only what he always said. What good will it do? And this time he spoke the truth. The master and lady of the manor house went to the city, and the balls and merrymaking began. But amid all the splendor, the old gentleman died, and the lady then, after all, did not wear her grand dresses. She was so sorrowful, and was dressed from head to foot in heavy black mourning. Not so much as a white tucker was to be seen. All the servants were in black. Even the state coach was covered with fine black cloth. It was an icy cold night. The snow glistened and the stars twinkled. The heavy hearse brought the body from the city to the country church, where it was to be laid in the family vault. The steward and the parish bailiff were waiting on horseback with torches in front of the cemetery gate. The church was lighted up, and the pastor stood in the open church door to receive the body. The coffin was carried up into the chancel. The whole congregation followed. The pastor spoke, and a psalm was sung. The lady was present in the church. She had been driven there in the black draped state coach, which was black inside as well as outside. Such a carriage had never before been seen in the parish. Throughout the winter, people talked about this impressive display of grief. It was indeed a nobleman's funeral. One could well see how important the man was, said the village folk. He was nobly born, and he was nobly buried. What good will it do him? Said the tailor. Now he has neither life nor goods. At least we have one of these. Don't speak such words, said Marin. He has everlasting life in the kingdom of heaven. Who told you that, Marin? Said the tailor. A dead man is good manure, but this man was too high-born to even do the soil any good. He must lie in a church vault. Don't speak so impiously, said Marin. I tell you again, he has everlasting life. Who told you that? Marin, repeated the tailor. And Marin threw her apron over little Rasmus. He must not hear that kind of talk. She carried him off into the peat house and wept. The words you heard over there, little Rasmus, were not your father's. It was the evil one who was passing through the room and took your father's voice. Say your Lord's Prayer. We'll both say it. She folded the child's hands. Now, again, she said, have faith in yourself and in our Lord. The year of mourning came to an end. The widow lady, dressed in half mourning, but she had whole happiness in her heart. It was rumored that she had a suitor and was already thinking of marriage. Marin knew something about it, and the pastor knew a little more. On Palm Sunday, after the sermon, the banns of marriage for the widow lady and her betrothed were to be published. He was a wood carver or a sculptor. Just what the name of his profession was, people did not know. At that time, Not many had heard of Thorvaldsen and his art. The future master of the manor was not a nobleman, but still he was a very stately man. His was one profession that people did not understand, they said. He cut out images, was clever in his work, and young and handsome. "What good will it do?" said tailor Ulsa. On Palm Sunday, the banns were read from the pulpit. Then followed a psalm and communion. The tailor, his wife, and little Rasmus were in church. The parents received communion, while Rasmus sat in the pew, for he was not yet confirmed. Of late, there had been a shortage of clothes in the tailor's house. The old ones had been turned and turned again, stitched and patched. Now they were all three dressed in new clothes, but of black material, as at a funeral. They were dressed in the drapery from the funeral coach. The man had a jacket and trousers of it, Marin a high-necked dress, and Rasmus a whole suit to grow in until confirmation time. Both the outside and inside cloth from the funeral carriage had been used. No one needed to know what it had been used for before, but people soon got to know. The wise woman, Stein, and a couple of other equally wise women who did not live on their wisdom, said that the clothes would bring sickness and disease into the household. One cannot dress oneself in cloth from a funeral carriage without riding to the grave. The wooden shoemaker's Johanne cried when she heard this talk. And it so happened that the tailor became more and more ill from that day on, until it seemed apparent who was going to suffer that fate. And it proved to be so. On the first Sunday after Trinity, Taylor, Elsa died, leaving Marin alone to keep things together. She did, keeping faith in herself and in our Lord. The following year, Rasmus was confirmed. He was then ready to go to the city as an apprentice to a master tailor, not after all one with 10 assistants at the table, but with one. Little Rasmus might be counted as a half. He was happy, and he looked delighted indeed, but Johanna wept. She was fonder of him than she had realized. The tailor's wife remained in the old house and carried on the business. It was at that time that the new King's Highway was opened, and the old one by the willow tree, and the tailor's became a field path with duckweed growing over the water left in the ditch there. The milepost tumbled over, for it had nothing to stand for, but the tree kept itself strong and beautiful, the wind whistling among its branches and leaves. The swallows flew away, and the starlings flew away, but they came again in the spring. And when they came back the fourth time, Rasmus too came back to his home. He had served his apprenticeship and was a handsome but slim youth. Now he would buckle up his knapsack and see foreign countries. That was what he longed for. But his mother clung to him. Home was the best place. All the other children were scattered about. He was the youngest, and the house would be his, He could get plenty of work if he would go about the neighborhood, be a traveling tailor, and sew for a fortnight at this farm and a fortnight at that. That would be traveling too. And Rasmus followed his mother's advice. So again, he slept beneath the roof of his birthplace. Again he sat under the old willow tree and heard it whistle. He was indeed good-looking, and he could whistle like a bird and sing new and old songs. He was well liked at the big farms, especially at Klaus Hansen's, the second richest farmer in the parish. Elle, the daughter, was like the loveliest flower to look at, and she was always laughing. There were people who were unkind enough to say that she laughed simply to show her pretty teeth. She was happy indeed, and always in the humor for playing tricks. Everything suited her. She was fond of Rasmus, and he was fond of her, but neither of them said a word about it. So he went about being gloomy. He had more of his father's disposition than his mother's. He was in a good humor only when Else was present. Then they both laughed, joked, and played tricks. But although there was many a good opportunity, and played tricks, he did not say a single word about his love. What good will it do, was his thought. Her parents look for profitable marriage for her, and that I cannot give her. The wisest thing for me to do would be to leave. But he could not leave. It was as if Else had a string fastened to him. He was like a trained bird with her. He sang and whistled for her pleasure and at her will. Johanne, the shoemaker's daughter, was a servant girl at the farm employed for common work. She drove the milk cart in the meadow, where she and the other girls milked the cows. Yes, and she even had to cart manure when it was necessary. She never came into the sitting room and didn't see much of Rasmus or Elsa, but she heard that the two were as good as engaged. Now Rasmus will be well off, she said. I cannot begrudge him that. And her eyes became quite wet. But there was really nothing to cry about. There was a market in the town. Klaus Hansen drove there, and Rasmus went along. He sat beside Elsa, both going there and coming home. He was numb from love, but he didn't say a word about it. He ought to say something to me about the matter, thought the girl, and there she was, right. If he won't talk, I'll have to frighten him into it. And soon there was talk at the farm that the richest farmer in the parish had proposed to Elsa. And so he had, but no one knew what answer she had given. Thoughts buzzed around in Rasmus's head. One evening, Elsa put a gold ring on her finger and then asked Rasmus what that signified. Betrothal, he said. And with whom do you think she asked? With the rich farmer, he said. There you have hit it, she said, nodding, and then slipped away. But he slipped away too. He went home to his mother's house like a bewildered man and packed his knapsack. He wanted to go out into the wide world. Even his mother's tears couldn't stop him. He cut himself a stick from the old willow and whistled as if he were in a good humor. He was on his way to see the beauty of the whole world. "This is a great grief to me," said the mother. "But I suppose it is wisest and best for you to go away, so I shall have to put up with it. Have faith in yourself and in our Lord. Then I shall have you back again, merry and happy." He walked along the new highway, and there he saw Johanne come driving with a load of rubbish. She had not noticed him, and he did not wish to be seen by her, so he sat down behind the hedge. There he was hidden, and Johanne drove by. Out into the world he went. No one knew where. His mother thought, "He will surely come home again before a year passes. Now he will see new things and have new things to think about. But then he will fall back into the old folds. They cannot be ironed out with any iron. He has a little too much of his father's disposition. I would rather he had mine, poor child. But he will surely come home again. He cannot forget either me or the house." The mother would wait a year and a day. Else waited only a month, and then she secretly went to the wise woman, Stein Madsdatter, who, besides knowing something about doctoring, could tell fortunes in cards and coffee, and knew more than her Lord's Prayer. She, of course, knew where Rasmus was. She read it in the coffee grounds. He was in a foreign town, but she couldn't read the name of it. In this town, there were soldiers and beautiful ladies. He was thinking of either becoming a soldier or marrying one of the young ladies. This Else could not bear to hear. She would willingly give her savings to buy him back, but no one must know that it was she. And old Stein promised that he would come back. She knew of a charm, a dangerous charm for him. It would work. It was the ultimate remedy. She would set the pot boiling for him, and then, wherever in all the world he was, he would have to come home where the pot was boiling, and his beloved was waiting for him. Months might pass before he came, but come he must, if he was still alive. Without peace or rest, night and day, he would be forced to return over sea and mountain, whether the weather were mild or rough, and even if his feet were ever so tired. He would come home. He had to come home. The moon was in the first quarter. It had to be for the charm to work, said old Stein. It was stormy weather, and the old willow tree creaked. Stein cut a twig from it and tied it in a knot. That would surely help to draw Rasmus home to his mother's house. Moss and house leek were taken from the roof and put in the pot which was set upon the fire. Else had to tear a leaf out of the psalm book. She tore out the last leaf by chance, that on which the list of errata appeared. "That will do just as well," said Stein, and threw it into the pot. Many sorts of things went into the stew, which had to boil and boil steadily until Rasmus came home. The black cock in old Stein's room had to lose its red comb, which went into the pot. Elsa's heavy gold ring went in with it, and that she would never get again. Stein told her beforehand. She was so wise, Stein. Many things that we are unable to name went into the pot, which stood constantly over the flame, or on glowing embers, or hot ashes. Only she and Elsa knew about it. Whenever the moon was new, or the moon was on the wane, Elsa would come to her and ask, "Can't you see him coming?" "Much do I know," said Stein, "and much do I see, but the length of the way before him I cannot see. Now he is over the first mountains. Now he is on the sea in bad weather. The road is long through large forests. He has blisters on his feet, and he has fever in his bones, but he must go on." "No, no," said Elsa. "I feel so sorry for him. He cannot be stopped now, for if we stop him, he will drop dead in the road." A year and a day had gone. The moon shone round and big, and the wind whistled in the old tree. A rainbow appeared across the sky in the bright moonlight. "That is a sign to prove what I say," said Stein. "Now Rasmus is coming." But still he did not come. "The waiting time is long," said Stein. "Now I am tired of this," said Elsa. She seldom visited Stein now, and brought her no more gifts. Her mind became easier, and one fine morning they all knew in the parish that Elsa had said yes to the rich farmer. She went over to look at the house, and grounds the cattle, and the household belongings. All was in good order, and there was no reason to wait with the wedding. It was celebrated with a great party lasting 3 days. There was dancing to the clarinet and violins. No one in the parish was forgotten in the invitations. Mother Ulsa was there too. And when the party came to an end, and the hosts had thanked the guests, and the trumpets had blown, she went home with the leavings from the feast. She had fastened the door only with a peg. It had been taken out. The door stood open, and in the room sat Rasmus. He had returned home, come that very hour. Lord God, how he looked! He was only skin and bone. He was pale and yellow. Rasmus said his ether, "Is it you I see? How badly you look, but I am so happy in my heart to have you back." And she gave him the good food she had brought home from the party, a piece of the roast and of the wedding cake. He had lately, he said, often thought of his mother, his home, and the old willow tree. It was strange how often in his dreams he had seen the tree and the little barefooted Johanna. He did not mention Elsa at all. He was ill and had to go to bed. But we do not believe that the pot was the cause of this, or that it had exercised any power over him. Only old Stein and Elsa believed that, but they did not talk about it. Rasmus lay with a fever, an infectious one. For that reason, no one came to the tailor's house, except Johanne the shoemaker's daughter. She cried when she saw how miserable Rasmus was. The doctor wrote a prescription for him to have filled at the pharmacy. He would not take the medicine. "What good will it do?" he said. "You will get well again then," said his mother. "Have faith in yourself and in our Lord. If I could only see you get flesh on your body, again hear you whistle and sing, for that I would willingly lay down my life." And Rasmus was cured of his illness, but his mother contracted it. Our Lord summoned her and not him. It was lonely in the house. He became poorer and poorer. "He is worn out," they said in the parish. Poor Rasmus. He had led a wild life on his travels. That, and not the black pot that had boiled, had sucked out his jarrow and given him pain in his body. His hair became thin and gray. He was too lazy to work. "What good will it do?" he said. He would rather visit the tavern than the church. One autumn evening, he was staggering through rain and wind along the muddy road from the tavern to his house. His mother had long since gone and been laid in her grave. The swallows and starlings were also gone, faithful as they were. Johanne the shoemaker's daughter was not gone. She overtook him on the road and then followed him a little way. "Pull yourself together, Rasmus. What good will it do?" he said. "That is an awful saying that you have said," she. "Remember your mother's words. Have faith in yourself and in our Lord. You do not, Rasmus, but you must, and you shall. Never say, 'What good will it do?' for then you pull up the root of all your doings." She followed him to the door of his house, and there she left him. He did not stay inside. He wandered out under the old willow tree and sat on a stone from the overturned milepost. The wind whistled in the tree's branches. It was like a song. It was like talk. Rasmus answered it. He spoke aloud, but no one heard him except the tree and the whistling wind. "I am getting so cold. It is time to go to bed. Sleep, sleep." And he walked away, not toward the house, but over to the ditch where he tottered and fell. Rain poured down, and the wind was icy cold, but he didn't feel this. When the sun rose and the crows flew over the bulrushes, he awoke deathly ill. Had he laid his head where he put his feet, he would never have arisen. The green duckweed would have been his burial sheet. Later in the day, Johanne came to the tailor's house. She helped him. She managed to get him to the hospital. "We have known each other since we were little," she said. "Your mother gave me both ale and food. For that, I can never repay her. You will regain your health. You will be a man with a will to live. And our Lord willed that he should live. But he had his up and downs, both in health and mind. The swallows and the starlings returned, and flew away, and returned again. Rasmus became older than his years. He sat alone in his house, which deteriorated more and more. He was poor, poorer now than Johanna. "You have no faith," she said. "And if we do not believe in God, what have we?" "You should go to communion," she said. "You haven't been since your confirmation." "What good will it do?" he said. "If you say that and believe it, then let it be. The Master does not want an unwilling guest at his table. But think of your mother and your childhood. Once you were a good, pious boy. Let me read a psalm to you." "What good will it do?" he said. "It always comforts me," she answered. "Johanne, you have surely become one of the saints." And he looked at her with dull, weary eyes. And Johanna read the psalm, but not from a book, for she had none. She knew it by heart. "Those were beautiful words," he said, "but I could not follow you altogether. My head feels so heavy." Rasmus had become an old man, but Elsa, if we may mention her, was no longer young either. Rasmus never mentioned her. She was a grandmother. Her granddaughter was an impudent little girl. The little one was playing with the other children in the village. Rasmus came along, supporting himself on his stick. He stopped, watched the children play, and smiled to them. Old times were in his thoughts. Elsa's granddaughter pointed at him. "Poor Rasmus," she shouted. The other little girls followed her example. "Poor Rasmus," they shouted, and pursued the old man with shrieks. It was a gray, gloomy day, and many others followed. But after gray and gloomy days, there comes a sunshiny day. It was a beautiful Whitsunday morning. The church was decorated with green birch branches. There was a scent of the woods within it, and the sun shone on the church pews. The large altar candles were lighted, and communion was being held. Johanna was among the kneeling, but Rasmus was not among them. That very morning, the Lord had called him. In God our grace, and mercy. Many years have since passed. The tailor's house still stands there, but no one lives in it. It might fall the first stormy night. The ditch is overgrown with bulrush and buckbean. The wind whistles in the old tree. It is as if one were hearing a song. The wind sings it. The tree tells it. If you do not understand it, ask old Johanne in the poorhouse. She still lives there. She sings her psalm, the one she read for Rasmus. She thinks of him, prays to our Lord for him. She, the faithful soul. She can tell of bygone times, of memories that whistle in the old willow tree.